Hello and good evening, everyone. It's my pleasure to introduce our visiting artist speakers for tonight, Dr. Rich Blundell and Rita Leduc, who have been collaborating for 4 years on an OICA project at Hubbard Brook Experimental Forest, a scientific research forest in the White Mountains of New Hampshire on the ancestral homeland of Abakanai and Wabanaki peoples. OICA is a scientifically informed, spiritually inspired, and culturally creative response to the spectrum of crises threatening the flourishing of life on Earth. OICA uses contemporary science, relational participation, and creative communication to restore our sense of deep interconnectedness within a cosmic tapestry that has been playing out for over 13.8 billion years. OICA asserts that identification with this whole-brained continuity will unlock creative resilience that is innate in all of us and the only basis for a beautiful future. Aspects of OICA will ring familiar to certain scientists, indigenous peoples, spiritual practitioners, artists, philosophers, and sensitive humans who also spend their lives drawing from the universal intelligence of nature to counter the crises our planet faces today. Richard and Rita began working together with Hubbard Brook Experimental Forest in 2021. Through their OICA collaboration, Rich's technical and participatory expertise of the natural world merges with Rita's phenomenological and process-oriented creative practice, creating cultural outputs that communicate an OICA worldview to a variety of audiences. We are fortunate enough to be one of those audiences today, gathering with respect and appreciation for the ancestral and contemporary lands of the Onondaga Nation upon which we commune. Please give a warm welcome to Rich Blundell and Rita Leduc as they offer their talk, The Coming AI Revolution, Artful Intelligence in the Beautiful Future.
Thank you.
Hello. Is this working? I can hear my voice. Yes. Hello. Okay. Thanks for having us. I'm going to give you a little rundown of what we're going to be doing here, and then I'm going to hand it off to Rich for most of the first half of the talk. So in this talk, we're going to take you on a bit of a journey. First, we're going to frame the talk in the context of the meta-crisis. And if you don't know what that is, that's okay, because Rich is going to explain that. Second, we will summarize advances in AI and neuroscience in order to contrast the depth and relationality between AI and human intelligence and highlight our challenge at hand. We're going to introduce the paradigm of OICA, and we're going to exemplify OICA through extending ecology. And then finally, we're going to propose that wisdom generated by artful intelligence can cultivate a better, more humane future. So we're going to take you on quite a wild ride. Should you be interested in interrupting us, you're welcome to. And you can also expect that we will be doing that to each other. That's kind of how we work, and it's how we really get conversations going. So without further ado.
Okay. So my job here is to first, I'm going to give you a little bit of an introduction to this thing that's called the meta-crisis. This is a quote by Zach Stein. I won't read the whole thing, but I will say the way he puts it, it's that it's a combination of ecological, economic, immigration, geopolitical, and energy crisis, and that we can all feel that. We can all turn on the news and just look at the internet, and we can see the meta-crisis happening. Maybe not everybody here is old enough to see some of the changes, but we can all feel it, that there's a sense of dread, there's a sense of anxiety, there's a sense of separation, there's a sense of injustice. I mean, I could go on, and I don't want to get too down. But what Zach is also pointing to here is that all of these crises, in the plurality of crises, they really center on one thing. At least this is our proposal. It centers on how we think, that there's something not quite right in the way that we are perceiving ourselves in the world, perceiving each other, perceiving ourselves as part of the world. There's a fundamental problem somewhere in the way we think. And this is why we're choosing to look at neuroscience, because that's the science of, or it's one of the ways that we can try to think about how we think. It's clearly pretty reductionist, and that's a problem, and we'll get into that. But that's the meta-crisis, and this is how we're framing our work, is what are we going to do about it? And the title of this talk is, it's the coming AI revolution, right? We've all heard the AI. We're going to reintroduce it as the artful intelligence revolution. That has yet to happen, but we're trying to cultivate it. Now, I want to just take a second to distinguish between two futures. I have this phrase I use, that the future is beautiful, or there isn't one. And I'm trying to highlight the difference between these two potential futures. The first one, let's just say the one that we're kind of on the path to right now, the one we're living into right now, is not, it's dreadful, and it's not pretty. But then there's another one. This is the one that we believe we can do. We still can do it, and it's not hard. It's not a question of sacrifice and compromise. It's actually a question of joy. It's a question of gratitude. It's a question of how do we cultivate these things in response to this meta-crisis. He says it here, the psyche, the human dimension that is in the direst of straits. So that's what we're really seeking to address. So I just want to prepare you for that's what we're trying to do. I know that is idealistic. I didn't say ideological. I said it's idealistic and possibly naive. I don't think it's naive, but I do think it is idealistic. Anyway, this is Ian McGilchrist, who's done a great amount of work. He's an ex-psychiatrist, brilliant guy, and he's come up with this hemispheric brain theory. You've probably heard of the folk psychology version of hemispheric brain theory, that people are right-brained or left-brained. And he's gone a long way to dispel some of those earlier conceptions of what this means, right and left brain. But what he says is that a left brain way of thinking, which is reductive, mechanistic, has taken us over. It treats the world as a simple resource to be exploited. It's made us enormously powerful. It's enabled us to become wealthy. It's also meant that we've lost the means to understand the world, to make sense of it, to feel satisfaction, fulfillment through our place in the world. So we're not alone in thinking this. Other, highly respected scholars are saying the same thing. He frames it as that our brains are hemispheric for a reason, that there's an evolutionary purpose to this, that the left brain was really preoccupied with things that are in detail, and it's about the small-scale, discrete things, and it's about controlling them and manipulating them, whereas the right hemisphere of the brain is more holistic in its orientation, and it looks for context, it seeks relationships between things, and it's the interplay of the two hemispheres that's out of whack. In fact, it's the left brain that has basically hijacked the right brain, and we've become just overly obsessed with objective knowledge and facts and things like that. So that's just a little bit more context about this work, because we might refer to left brain and right brain. I just wanted you to know that it's grounded in some pretty serious neuroscience. But now what I want to do, and this is risky for me, because I'm kind of outside of my comfort zone with this material. So if you're a neuroscientist or a statistician or even a mathematician, and I say something that offends you, I would love to be educated in a kind and constructive way. So so feel free to update my knowledge about this. But what I'm going to do is to give you just a brief overview at a really high conceptual level what this neuroscience, machine learning, AI thing, what is it? What exactly is it that we're all so hyped up about right now? And there's a reason I'm going to do this, but anyway, so we'll start it. And I'm going to start with this idea of this Bayesian brain hypothesis. This is based on Bayes' theorem, which is this thing right here. It's an equation that we think is used to make predictions about things in the world. And I won't get into the math or really even too much of the terms. Instead, I'm just going to go to the forest first. So this is a shot from Hubbard Brook. This is Rita looking up at one of our favorite trees that we found. And what this Bayesian brain hypothesis is doing, how close is our perception of the world to the actual world? you'd think that it feels like these things are just a one-to-one, that our perceptions are it. But it turns out it's not like that at all. There's a lot of gray area, there's a lot of guesswork that goes on, a lot of inference. But this is what it's trying to do. This equation is trying, in this instance, there's many scenarios where this equation could be used, but in this instance, it's about Rita's perception of that tree. I'm just going to go through these real quick, these terms first. So you've got the posterior, which is the actual world. It's the probability of V, the input data, given U, which is the world itself. So it's basically saying, what is the probability of Rita's conception of that tree is accurate based on U, which is the data. So that equals the likelihood of observed data, and then on the right term, you've got a prior. These priors are going to be really important later on, because what this is an equation that updates itself. It makes a prediction, then it corrects for the error in that prediction, and then it makes another prediction. And then it basically iterates, and it tries to get a closer and closer conception or perception of the world based on updating, based on minimizing error in its predictions. And it uses that prior to make that calculation. Now, the denominator here, P, probability or sensitivity, I don't really know what that means. The people that I've listened to talk about this call it a normalizing term or something like that. Someone here probably knows what that means. But what they do, and I find this really frustrating and exciting at the same time, is they take it away. So they say, we're not going to try and understand the full complexity of the world. We're just going to remove that whole complexity and focus on the one tree to make it easier. We're going to just remove all that context so that we can focus on this tree. And in this instance, it's about Rita trying to perceive that tree. So you've got a tree, and then you've got some kind of boundary between tree and Rita. I've made it a dotted line on purpose. On the left is this, the causes of her perceptions, the tree, right? And then the idea is that she receives that data into her mind, her consciousness, her brain. Sorry, I don't mean to make this all about you, but
Isn't it always?
yeah, I guess so. Yeah, par for the course. And so then you've got this sensory data comes across this barrier, which is the world, into Rita, right? Her brain goes into work processing it somehow, and then it updates it through this Bayesian formula. And the idea is that this is supposed to describe how human beings perceive the world, but not only how we perceive the world, how we make decisions to act in the world. So apparently this is like a really powerful formula. It can be used in all different kinds of ways. You can configure it a little bit differently, and you can use it to explain entropic systems.
And I want to point out that the prior shows up here, right? So it's not just me receiving the tree, but that my perception of the tree is affected by the fact that I have priors of other trees that I have had experiences with in my life. So that's going to be really important.
Right. Priors are a big motivator here. So then I've got a lot of my information from this guy, Shamil Chandraria, he's really great. There's an excellent YouTube video where he walks through all of this, including the math. And if anybody's interested in that, feel free to approach me and I'll get you that link. He says, although Bayes' theorem is a mathematically optimal solution that maximizes the value of all information and is absolutely the correct mathematical solution, we cannot solve it. We cannot solve it using machine learning because it's computationally explosive, and evolution cannot solve it. Biological beings cannot solve it explicitly. I think what he's saying there at the end is that it can't solve biological processing. He's not saying that biological beings can't solve it. We obviously do solve it. We walk, we do things, we meet people, we interact with the world, we perceive and we act. So we obviously have figured it out. Evolution has figured it out. I think what he's actually saying is that the equation can't solve the biology. I think that's what he's hinting at. And so he says, so how do we get around it? We can draw inspiration from machine learning techniques like artificial neural networks. And that's where we're going to go next. We're going to go into this idea of machine learning and neural networks. Okay? Basically, it's this. This is and I don't know which came first, the chicken or the egg. There's this thing where right now there's a lot of flirting going on between neuroscience, the biology and physiology of the brain, and computational science. Computational neuroscience, they call it, which I think is a contradiction. But anyway, these two things are starting to talk to each other in really intriguing, really provocative, really exciting ways. But I think there's something amiss, and we're going to get to that. But anyway, so this is just a schematic of a neural network. You've got the inputs on the left, and these send data into these layers in the middle, which get processed through that Bayesian formula. And then we get an output on the right, which is just the output of this processing. And I'm just going to go a little bit further. So I'm going to go over these 4 terms just on this slide. The first one is just predictive processing. So when you take this Bayesian theorem and you apply it to data, and then you update it with more data, you're making a prediction. So the body and the mind and the brain has the architecture to make predictions about what to expect. That's why those priors are really important. If you're in the forest, you expect to see trees. You're predicting to see trees. That weights heavily into your perception of trees. So that's predictive processing. They talk about it and they use it in the computational world, and now they're starting to talk about it in the actual neurophysiology world. The other one is active inference. After you make that prediction, it's not fully correct. And so what the brain does is it infers what it might be. So it actually creates sensations, sense data, based on the input, and then it uses that to make a prediction, to imagine what it might be, and then it puts that back out to the sensory system, back out into the world for testing, for real-world ground testing. That's what they're talking about here. If you're not following me, that's okay. My point is just that there's a lot of conciliant language. There's a lot of symmetry in the language between what the neuroscientists are saying and what the computational engineers are saying. There's another thing called gradient descent. What that's talking about is how information moves through this system. It's either getting coded or decoded, and every time it does that, it changes the nature of the data. I'm just going to skip ahead here. This is an image. You start seeing these around. It's basically a schematic of the brain. The little neurons at the top, and then the big neurons at the bottom. And basically, this is the cortex of the brain, just visualized schematically. You can see how it has the same structure as the neural network that the computational scientists use. So this is what I mean. They're starting to borrow metaphors and concepts from neuroscience and use them in artificial intelligence, machine learning, and they're also taking these same ideas in machine learning and applying them to how we understand the brain, which is really, and it seems to be working. They're making really good conceptual explanations of how these things work. This is another one this is another idea that we're going to talk about. It's called variational hierarchy algorithm. Basically, what this is if you fold these two on the right over, you'll get this pyramid-like thing. It's processing data through it, right? So this direction, then that direction, this direction, then that direction. And I can show you an image of what that looks like. This is what it looks like in an artificial neural network. Data is going in, getting processed through the layers, predictions made, and then it inferences back. So it's called feed forward and then back propagation, if I can go back. But these little pyramids, they have these little red bars on them. This is called the prediction code, the code that they're going for. That's the prior. The idea here is that in our brains, in our minds, in our consciousness, in the architecture, the structure of our consciousness, there are these patterns, okay? These patterns represent earlier experiences. And the idea here is that these experiences they're hierarchical. There's lower level ones, medium level ones, higher level ones that go further and further back. The idea is that those are priors that are fed into that equation to weight our guesses about what the world actually is. Okay? This is about perception. How do we perceive the world? It's also about action. Okay, so very quickly, I just want to talk about one more thing. This is all going to become sort of relatively coherent in a minute. This is an idea called the free energy principle, which is an idea that has to do with how a system will do its best to not expend or need energy. In other words, it's trying to conserve energy all the time. This is an idea that's pretty common in thermodynamics and entropy and things like that. You can see how systems tend to conserve energy. The same thing happens with information. Information and energy in some ways are synonymous. But what's interesting here is that this free energy principle, it applies if you're using it at the scale of a cell, and it applies at the scale of a brain, and it applies at the scale of atoms, it applies at the scale of chaotic systems. In other words, it's uniform, it's universal to all things. So there's a deep symmetry, there's a deep fundamental connection to nature somewhere in this conversation. It's down there, and it's called the free energy principle. This becomes important later when we start talking about continuity, because what it's saying is that nature and the mind are continuous, and it's through this, one of the ideas is this free energy principle. And as I was saying, it's not just about the way we think, but it's the way that we act. These same algorithms, these same computational, these equations applied to thinking, also applied to acting. This is how we tell our body to do stuff. This is how we tell our body to what's called epistemic foraging. So when we go looking for knowledge, when we go looking for information, it's all predicated, apparently, on these Bayesian dynamics. I know this was a lot, and I just want to now put it behind us and say, so this is the idea, okay? Our current conceptions of AI have us something like this, that there's a human being and there's all these computational dynamics going on in our heads, something like that. But what I want to really take seriously and propose is that it's not just that. This is just an electrical storm. It's nature. What we're proposing is that it's more like this. And the data backs this up. But what's important to make note of here is that we started with nature. So we're starting with the thunderstorm. We're starting with the sky, the clouds. And then we have the human mind evolves amidst nature, and it's still in us. Do you see the difference here? On the left, it's a flat computational dynamic. On the right, it's more of a relational dynamic. These are two different paradigms that I'm trying to propose here. The paradigm on the left is the one we're currently in or heading toward. It's the way we're thinking right now about AI. But the one on the right is what we're calling oika. It's the oika paradigm. It's that nature is deep within us, and it doesn't divide the way we think, what we imagine, what our dreams are, what our hopes are. It's actually all deeply part of nature. It has what's called ontological continuity. All right, I'm going to do one more thing, and then I promise I'm going to stop. But I'm going to compare why this problem has emerged, and I think it has something to do with the way we think. And there's two terms, synchronic and diachronic. These have to do with how we perceive the system. So if I show you this, okay, how do you explain that? What is it? It's kind of hard to say. Well, it looks like pollywogs, purple pollywogs with red tails. Okay, that's your interpretation. That's your explanation of what that is. That's a synchronic explanation compared to if I started to show you something earlier in the evolution of this system. And let's say it started like this and it ended like that. Now we're getting a little bit more diachronic. If I show you this really starts to explain this. You couldn't do it when you just had that. You've got to see how the system evolves. It turns out this is a program they're trying to model the origins of life. And what it is the white part is just a growth medium of nutrients, and then these little blue things, these little blue beings here, they're processing the nutrients and surviving, but if they stay in one place too long, they die. And then what happens is this parasitic other red thing comes into the picture, starts consuming the blue things. In order to avoid the red things, the blue things move. They move through the medium, and suddenly you've got a moving organism all of a sudden because of this new thing that entered into the system. And then eventually you end up, this is the system in equilibrium. My point is this: if you were to look at this synchronically, a snapshot view, just that, you'd have a really hard time explaining it. This is why we take a diachronic view. And this is my field of big history, which is basically the evolution of the cosmos. It takes the ultimate diachronic view, and it goes all the way back to the mystery before the Big Bang, and starts to understand things diachronically instead of what we're doing now, which is just taking a snapshot. So that's the difference between these two things. This one on the left is a left brain way of seeing consciousness in the brain, in the world, in the human. It's saying, this is what it is, let's explain it. A diachronic view says, well, how did it come to be? It puts it into relationship with everything that came before. It's an ecological way of trying to understand this system. If you listen to the philosophers, all the great philosophers start with consciousness. They don't start with what came before. They don't go before Socrates. They don't go into the way that life emerged on the planet. They don't look at that. They don't look at how a molecule that's not even alive will move through a medium based on different cues and different motivations that come from the environment. And they don't factor that into their conceptions of consciousness. So I hope that makes sense. So now we're going to switch again. I'm going to need to take a break. But I'm going to get back to Ian McGilchrist, and he says, so what do we need, this guy? What is he saying? What we need is this attentive response to something real and other than ourselves, which we only have inklings of at first, maybe like the one I just gave, that's an inkling, but which becomes more and more into being through our response to it, through our relationship to it. And if we're truly responsive to it, if we enact it, if we nurture it into being or not, it has something to do with the structure of love. That's what he's saying. Okay, so I'm going to see if I can do this quickly. I'm going to introduce oika. Oika is this, aside from being just a word that I invented, it refers to the creative intelligence of nature. Oika invokes three things. These are the only three things that you really need to know about oika right now. Ontological continuity, which is that reality is continuous. Right relationality, which is an it's just ecological intelligence. And cognitive entanglement, which is why I've been talking about neuroscience. I'm trying to understand and get my arms around how consciousness is entangled with the world in a profound way, in a way that can help us heal and respond to the meta-crisis. Ontological continuity is something that we establish in oika. In other words, you establish it in your life. It needs to be phenomenologically established, which means that you need to experience it. And the way we do this in big histories, we start pretty much they started at the Big Bang. I tend to start even earlier, the mystery before the Big Bang. But we start at the Big Bang and we work our way through and we see how the cosmos has evolved. This is the cosmic microwave background radiation. This is a picture taken of the cosmos just 380,000 years after the Big Bang. And what we see in it are these gradations. We see these little fluctuations of temperature. That's what those colors represent. Because of those fluctuations, there's the potential for relationships between different areas in space. Do you see the right relationality here? There's relationships happening in the primordial light of the universe. It was an ecosystem. We're living in an ecology of light. That light evolves into stars. Stars go supernova. They create planetary systems. This is the accretionary disk of the solar system, an artist's rendition of it. But what we see here is more differentiation, more relationships happening, more right relationships because things are being created, new planets around stars. And when we see on this one of these planets, this lucky planet that we're living on, life emerges from relationships between molecules and proto-molecules in warm, shallow seas or hydrothermal vents. We get life happening. That life explodes in the Cambrian explosion, and we see all these new creatures that have all these new capacities to sense the world, to perceive the world. Remember, we were talking about the Bayesian theorem was about how do we perceive the world? Well, all we have to do is look at the way the trilobites did it. It's in the fossil record. They did an early version of perceiving the world, and they used electromagnetism from the cosmic microwave background radiation to power their neural networks. It's all there. There's this big continuity. Those three words on the right, you should be seeing those in these images. And so here's a species of primates, Sahelanthropus chadensis. It's a bipedal or nearly bipedal ape, and it sees a berry, and it responds to that berry. It wants to taste it. It perceives it. It wants to taste it. It acts. It uses that neurological system to have a relationship with the world. And then it's seduced into a relationship with the world through the berry. That's a relationality that's happening there. And it's also cognitive entanglement because that berry is now in the mind of the primate. And then that urge to move. Yeah, do you have a question?
Yeah, I was just wondering if you
Yeah, we're getting there. Yeah, we are getting there. Hang in there. It's all going to become coherent here, I hope. So we've got primates moving through the habitats of the Earth. In every interaction that a human has through eons and eons of generations, the Earth teaches us how to move and how to be in the world. This is the foundations of our consciousness right here. The Earth teaches us through the stones that we create tools from. The Earth is teaching us how to do higher order cognitive capacities. There's a relationship here as well. We've got human, listen, here's the thing. I love dolphins. I love orangutans. I love bees. I love beetles. I love pond scum, okay? But none of these things do what humans do. No other species on this planet is as complex and beautiful and motivated and like that we are. Here's where we got it. The Earth taught us how to be this way because we're the only species that has had a long, sustained, intimate relationship with every habitat on the planet. I call this Earthling theory. It taught us how to make art. This is an image of a walrus tusk carved into this reindeer or caribou. The Earth was teaching us, and what did we do with what it taught us? We created art. We created art that expressed our intimate relationship to the planet. This is the beginnings of art. And that's the basis for this argument, that the whole world, nature itself, is happening in our brains. It's not just some computational thing. This is my point. We're all worried about AI taking over the world. There's this doomsday scenario that it's going to surpass us in intelligence. It's going to potentially enslave us, possibly even make us go extinct, exterminate us. It doesn't have the capacity to do that. Our intelligence has a 13.8 billion year history that's embodied in everything that we do. AI doesn't have that, okay? It's just an input in, input out. Granted, it can do some pretty impressive things, but nowhere near as impressive as us. This slide, I think, is really just a joke because it opens the opportunity for Rita to speak, because what we're doing in Hubbard Brook, it's a map of Hubbard Brook and us walking through it, is basically a continuation of what the human species has been doing all along. This idea that the world is teaching us how to think, how to be, how to create. That's what's happening here as well. So finally now, I can turn it over to Rita so we can start talking about art.
Woo! All right. Okay, so, I mean, but I don't want to dismiss, like please hold everything that Rich just said, because that's what I do when I'm in the forest with him, and that's what he does all the time, and that is what a diachronic view is. Right? So here we're not going to just talk about art. We're not going to like leave all that in the dust and then like talk about art over here. The whole point is that the art that's going to get us to this second paradigm option has got to be connected to everything that he just laid out. So who are we? What are we doing? All right. In 2021, Rich and I embarked on a collaboration with Hubbard Brook Experimental Forest. The parameters were we would take an ecologist, Rich, an artist, myself, and a forest, Hubbard Brook, and we would cultivate sustained relational engagement with scientific knowledge. And so Rich mostly brings that. And when I say knowledge, I don't just mean the stuff he just delivered to you. I also mean his way of being in the world, right? So he's a geologist, he's a science communicator. He also climbed Kilimanjaro. He used to guide people up Kilimanjaro. He's got massive experience that would come into play kind of in the present, and then he could take me back into the Big Bang as well. So kind of hold that's happening in the forest. And then creative being, and that's kind of a stand-in for me. I'm the one that would create objects, but really we're both executing creative being here. I mean, that's kind of part of being collaborative with the forest. And so we're meeting somewhere upstream, which is where we use nature as our primary source, as our wisdom source. So we have different practices, different experiences, different skill sets, but we're both turning to nature, which is a problematic term, but essentially the world as our primary source. And so we were going to immerse ourselves in the phenomenology of natural complexity. This was the idea. So I'm going to take you through some examples to show you what happened. I mean, this is a 4-year project. It's still ongoing. And there's just, I call the artwork byproducts. I don't really see them as like outcomes per se. They just kind of happen as we go. But essentially, the broad intentions of the project, as well as of OICA writ large, are number 1, restore subject-object unity. So continuity, right? Like we, us, and the forest need to be reconnected. There's an anthropologist, Eduardo Cohn, who has a great book called How Forests Think. And he uses the term the semiotic field, and he talks about how there's a broader semiotic field of meaning that we could tap into, but we're stuck. This is really similar to what McGilchrist says. We're stuck in the symbolic representation, which is like language, and we exist there. But in fact, there's this way, way, way bigger semiotic field that we could tap into, and so that's what we're trying to do. Once we do that, we're going to transfer the ecological intelligence that we gain from that field from the forest into us. When that happens, we've got some entanglement going on, we've got continuity going on, and it feels really good because we're in right relationship. Once we do that, we're going to take some co-creative risks with the intelligence, so we start to create, things start to emerge. That semiotic field, like we're fluent in that because of everything Rich just talked about, because of how we evolved from the mystery before the Big Bang, we actually have a primal understanding of this semiotic field. It's just a matter of plugging back into it. And then finally, we're going to offer the work that we create into culture as a whole brain remedy for the meta-crisis. So hi, this is what we're doing right now. But the claim here is that the wisdom that we're getting, like on the ground in the forest, because of continuity, not only does it track all the way back down to the mystery before the Big Bang, but it tracks right here, right now, to the present day in Syracuse, in this auditorium, and into the future, right? So continuity allows us to make that claim. Okay, before I continue, sometimes because of priors, people will, what I call snap, what we're saying into something that it is not. And so I just want to kind of lay the groundwork here. So artful intelligence, what it is and what it isn't. Artful intelligence is not left brain takeover, okay? So it's not just information, not just knowledge, not just explanations. It is not human as the origin. It is not the artist as the genius. It is not ideas that just poof, like start in someone's brain, okay? And it is not art before the horse. The art here is not the thing, okay? The art is manifesting the relationship that is pointing to the relational entity as a whole, okay? So artful intelligence is mystery. It's playing in the mystery. It's accepting the mystery, surfing the mystery. It is deep relational intelligence. It's the fossil record, and it's developing a relationship with the fossil record. And then it is first-person participation. So it's getting in there and being with it. Any questions on that? All right, so we did that. So I'm going to go into these examples, but I want you to also hold, while I know your arms are getting really full because you're holding everything that Rich just said, but also please hold that during all of this that I'm about to show you, we were immersing ourselves in the forest. So we walked in the forest. We sat in the snow. We went into the brook. We contemplated in the forest. We looked at the forest. We hiked into the forest. We touched the forest. We ate the forest. We studied the forest, we learned the science of the forest, we grieved with the forest, we drew the forest, we had fun with the forest, we played with the forest, we did all sorts of things with the forest. Okay, so here I am kind of, the idea here is like, this is an OICA research project. I am essentially like Rich's subject, right? So I am listening to everything that he's saying. I am in the forest with him. And me, for my work, I study ecosystems. So for me, it was like, okay, normally it's like me in a place. But now it's like me in a place and this guy. And so I get to kind of listen and take in everything that the entanglement is putting into my body. And so all of the stuff I just showed you that we did in the forest, all entering my body, the stories, all the things he just told you, entering my body. And then here on the left is Lindsay Restad, and at the time, she was the lead ecologist at Hubbard Brook. Before we dove in 2021, she gave us a tour. And something that she said on that tour that really stuck with me was she's talking about how Hubbard Brook is a long-term ecological research forest, which means that it's been around for over 60 years. And these are all the water samples that they've taken over the course of the past 60 years. And she was talking about baselines. Hubbard Brook is a place where you can really establish a lot of different baselines because they've been doing this research for so long. And then she would talk about tipping points, and she meant climate tipping points. And so what a lot of the researchers there are doing are looking for where those baselines are shifting to the point of no return. So I was thinking about tipping points. And then here in the middle, you see Rich. This is during the tour, and that's a weir, which is where the scientists collect a lot of their water data. And Rich pointed to that weir, and I remember this moment because he pointed to that weir and he said, this is a place, this is evidence of humans who care. And after hearing all about the science of Hubbard Brook, that just really resonated with me because he could have said, this is evidence of humans who have information, or this is evidence of humans with knowledge. But he said, this is evidence of humans who care. And I really liked that, and I held that. And then the last little story I'm going to tell you is one of these days we were in the forest and we took a long hike and we drove, this is Rich's truck, and we drove his truck into the forest pretty deep, took the hike, met the truck, and I suddenly had a feeling arise in me. I didn't know why until I then cognitively realized, oh, he's going to ask me to drive his truck back because he wants to walk the rest of the way. I don't know why. I didn't want to drive his truck. It's a big truck. I'm a little person. It's not my truck. I didn't want to drive it. Sure enough, he asked me to drive his truck. I drove the truck. It was fine. But I thought, that's really interesting because before I labeled what that feeling was, it could have been excitement. It could have been joy. It could have been celebration. It could have been sorrow. It was anxiety. But it didn't have to be. And so I thought that was really interesting.
So the idea there is that the tipping points don't necessarily need to elicit anxiety. They could be something else. Is that what you mean?
Yeah. So, right. And also recall active inference and predictive processing, right? Mm-hmm. Something enters into you, you use your priors to label it. Okay, so we're going to get back to that. All right, so I go into the forest, I do my thing. And my thing involves hiking into a spot, taking this, it's sort of silly, taking this frame, I cover it with acetate, it's very clear, and I use provisional materials to work on the acetate, and I put fabric, I put things in the landscape sometimes, and it's my way of escaping, right? So it's a sort of fast tracks me to completely dissolving my sense of self and plugging into this broader semiotic field, this bigger sense of self. So when I do this, Rich says I disappear. I lose myself, and it's a way to get into the flow state pretty quickly.
And that also doesn't allow priors to really show up like they normally would in cognitive process. I've watched her do this, and she disappears, which puts her in a different cognitive state, in a more vulnerable state, but one that's open to whatever the complexity of the forest is trying to transmit. She's there for it in this art practice.
It's super intense, and through trying to create a composition and working with materials, I'm really slipping myself into a sort of pre-perceptive state that allows me. So here you can see this is one of the pieces, and so what I ended up doing is I made 9 of these pieces at the weirs. There's 9 weirs, and then 9 down at the brook. And on the left here, I don't usually show these, but I take a photo through the frame, and the idea here is that it is a visualization of the phenomenology that I just described to you. And so the hope here is that the materials that I add and the actual environment start to conflate. You start to kind of confuse. You don't see the boundaries right away. You don't see what's what right away. And then as you look at it, it starts to gain clarity. So I made 9 of these at the weirs, and then 9 of these at the brook. And so again, they are photos, but ultimately, what I get from them is my data. So on the far left, you see the 9 pieces from the brook. So this is the acetate that I took directly out of the frame. And then in the middle, you see the 9 pieces from the weirs. And then here, so then I cut them up. And so I have my stash of brook data and my stash of weir data. And you can already see the difference, right? So the brook data is gestural, it's colorful, it's celebratory. The weir data has some weight to it. It's geometric. It's a bit darker, right? They're different. And what happened, what I was noticing was that matches the way that I felt when I was down at the brook. The brook was like alive, and there were birds, and there was the babbling, and it was sparkly, like the sun, and the weirs. I was working with geometry, and so I had to really focus, and it was more precise, and it wasn't bad, but it was just a much different phenomenology. Okay, so I put the data. I'm going to have to really rush here. I put the data together. And what I started finding was that something seemed like it wanted to emerge out of the weird data. So I'm being intuitive when I take it all back to my studio, and I'm still continuing this conversation with the forest. All of the things that happened in the forest are in me, and they're coming out through the collages. And so what I ended up creating was a series. There's 4 of these. They each have 3 pieces in them. But there's a baseline piece. There's the post tip, and then there's the tip. And I want you to see, I just noticed how similar this is to the slide that Rich showed when he talked about synchronic and diachronic. So that's kind of crazy. That's like in action, in action. Anyway, so here I'm thinking about the tipping point showed up again, but instead it was like, where do you want the tip to tip towards? When you feel a sense of potential rising up in you, where do you want to go to? So you could just stay at that baseline and say, well, we're here, we're fine, we reached our destination. But in fact, there was all that potential sitting in there. And if you feel it rise up, you're able to apply it in that way. It's just like active planning. Here's another example. So there were 4 of these. And then I wanted to show you how we used it in real life. This is an exhibition at the Museum of the White Mountains. And again, I'm just going to go really fast here, but in order to, well, I guess we're okay. We have some time. In order to balance the order and the chaos, like the weirs and the brook, we wanted to create a space of emergence. And so this is a space that we also wanted to create inside the exhibition. So we thought, like, how can we create a space for people where they feel like they're held, they feel like there's some sort of safety, there's structure, but then they also feel like they can kind of play and harness the energy of the pre-tip, so that maybe if they leave the exhibition, they realize that there's some new potential that's been stirred up in them that they can apply then out in the world. And so one of the ways that we did this was Rich created these panels, and this panel mirrored a painting. They didn't all do that. But in the panels, he used words, right? Symbolic representation. But the words were somewhat poetic, scientific, and narrative. So it sort of softened the boundary, right? And then it kind of led people into an abstract visual communication, which then we hoped would lead people down into this kind of second paradigm, oikodynamic, artful intelligence kind of space. So we were really trying to escort people down into this broader relational semiotic field with the understanding that, like, that's going to be a little bit hard, and so they're going to need some entry points from us, a little bit of guidance. And just to say, like, we are traversing, it's not just linear. Like, we're traversing that all the time when we're in the forest. And by doing that, by kind of going up and down, in and out across these fields of, like, concrete features, high dimensionality, abstract features, low dimensionality, oika, artful intelligence, language, abstraction, what we're doing is this picture on the top is a picture of priors, people with, like, really ingrained, snapped priors, really kind of hard to budge, right? And we're flattening that plane so that you're able to actually flow around more freely. And that way, potential gets unlocked in a way that it never could before. Okay, second example. We all doing good? Yeah. Okay. Gorge. So while we're working on tipping points, there was a certain time of day on Hubbard Brook Road where the light from the gorge just, like, exploded out. And so Rich, curious as he is, wanted to go see what that was. Turns out it was a gorge, but we couldn't get there. So we hiked all the way there, and then due to the, like, geologic formations, we were, like, totally stopped. But Rich and I like to take cues from the world, and so we thought, okay, well, there must be some reason for that. So let's go visit every time we do a baseline check. So we would do these baseline checks. They're kind of seasonal. Go to Hubbard Brook, and one of the places we always go is the gorge. And what we do when we get there, we could feel, like, walking towards the gorge, there's a levity. Like, we start to get, like, a pep in our step the closer we get to the gorge. And then we get to the gorge, and the light that gets trapped in the gorge, we can see it, and we can study how it travels down the water. The leaves are all kind of receiving it. The rocks are kind of sparkling. The moss is soaking it up, and we're soaking it up too. And so we stand there for a while, and we have a snack, and sometimes we draw, and we talk about things, talk about neuroscience, talk about philosophy. And then we hike out, and the hike out is like a pretty steep incline. But because we've been filled up with the light, because we just feel better, it's easy, and it's like a joy. And we get to the top, and we feel good, and that's it. We did our gorge baseline check. And so I wanted to make some work that talked about this journey. And instead of making just one piece, so this is a drawing, it's on paper, it's 30 inches by 50 inches, it's pretty big, it's kind of like a human scale. I wanted to make a series that sort of walked into the gorge. And I wanted to see, it was an experiment for me because I wanted to see what would happen if I tried to do that walk from my studio. So the beginning of these, I actually don't really like. I don't really like this one. It's very illustrative, not super into it, but it definitely, like when I was done, so a lot of times what I'll do is I'll just make the work, I'll try not to judge it because I think it's telling me something. This is why I say I'm a research artist or that it's a byproduct. I really try not to, and this is what makes it relational and not art before the horse, right? You try to like let it speak. The forest and Rich are speaking to me through the processes that I'm enacting in my studio. And so you can see as we kind of flip through the pieces, you're getting closer to the gorge. This was not intentional. I did not plan this ahead of time. But what I found is that these middle pieces, you start to kind of feel like you're standing in the light. And then I started having fun. I was having more fun in the studio, and the pieces start to reflect the joy that I was feeling because I had just taken like a, I don't know, psychedelic walk like to the gorge in my studio. And then this is the last piece. So you can kind of see like, you know, the light is beckoning, and then as I start to express it and manifest it, I become it. And that's exactly what was happening at the gorge. Yeah, I'm gonna skip this. This is continued research. Just to say that like when you ask questions, more questions come. And so I'm still working with the light in the gorge. And then in real life, right? Where does this show up in real life? Rita, why do we care? In December, my father-in-law was diagnosed with a terminal illness, essentially. And so my family and I were driving to go celebrate what could have been our last Christmas with him. And as we were driving, I was like, has this happened before? Like, why does this feel familiar? And what I realized was the feeling of driving to my father-in-law's house to have a very intense, very beautiful, very treacherous, very painful, potentially, experience with him felt similar to walking into the gorge, right? Like those rocks are treacherous. That's why we can't get in there. But it's also beautiful. And when we're there, we fill up. And so what that helped me do was it helped me behave in a certain way and have certain expectations that weekend that we celebrated with him. And then know, I was able to predict that leaving was going to be hard, but that I would have the strength because of the beautiful weekend we were going to have together. And because of that, because I could map that onto the phenomenology of the gorge, not only was I able to get through it, but I was able to be there for my family to get through it. And my father-in-law is now in deep remission, and everything's good. Okay, last example, Watershed 9. There's not a lot of artwork from Watershed 9, and that's kind of the point, because I want to let you guys know that like it's not actually about the goal of making the thing. Watershed 9 is everyone's favorite watershed. All the scientists that we talked to loved it. Rich and I first encountered Watershed 9 at what we called the Giggle, which is where Watershed 9 meets Hubbard Brook. It's actually more like a gurgle, but it makes noise. And it's very playful and beautiful, and we love it, and we visit it whenever we can. And so these are moments that we have visited. You can see how it makes us feel playful. So these are times when we have visited it. But we wanted to know, what is it about Watershed 9? And so we decided to hike up to the top of Watershed 9. And so here you can see we decided intuitively to take a diachronic perspective. It's a fractal of a diachronic perspective. And so we went all the way up the watershed. And what was crazy was it changed ecotones, so it kept changing. And as it kept changing, remember the brain with the lightning storm? I felt my brain, my psyche kept changing. Every time the textures, the colors, the shapes changed, I started thinking about different things. I got real dark there. I remember I was thinking about like real dark things. I was like there, it was like, oh, this is fun. Where are we going? What's going, right? Like, so the conversations that we had together changed as the landscape changed. And then we got to the bog. And so up here you can see 2021, Rich's face when he gets to the bog, and then 2024. The bog isn't easy to get to, so we actually only just returned this summer, but the bog is amazing. It is silent. Well, the noise, anytime there's a noise, it's like really sharp and loud, and it just disappears. It just absorbs into the space. And so we spend time in the bog, we snack in the bog, nap in the bog. There's flies that like buzz around. And so like, I remember while I was napping, my consciousness was kind of going in and out like the flies as they were buzzing around, like their noise would then just like come in and disappear. So all of these things are like entangled and intertwined. But the bog was pure, and there was a power at the bog that wasn't dissimilar to the power of the light in the gorge. And so again, in real life, like, why is this relevant? And so the bog, the Watershed 9 is like still teaching us. I haven't, like I said, I haven't made a lot of artwork from Watershed 9, but it's really influential, and it's talking to us about this very journey, right? Like this journey that we're all on. So how can we channel, how can we let in this like pure light and then carry it all the way down the watershed with these tannins? There's these like, Watershed 9 has like, it's really rich and dark, and it's got flotsam, and it's bubbly, and so it gets baggage all the way down, but then you get down to the giggle and it's laughing. Like, what a lesson that is. Like, if I could be that kind of an elder, like, I think I've done my job right. So Watershed 9 is just going to teach us forever and ever. Okay, final example. I don't know, you're all going to leave me? Okay. All right, so I'm making this presentation, and I'm working on the next slide, and I'm looking up pictures of the meta-crisis, and I'm just like feeling kind of down, because looking at pictures of the meta-crisis isn't the idea of a good time. And Rich sent me a text, and it says, great example of a xenolith, which is a typical text from Rich, but I didn't know what a xenolith was, and I could have just ignored him. But I thought, well, this is sort of interesting. Like, here I am looking up the government crisis, and then I have a xenolith on my screen, and what's a xenolith? And so I looked up a xenolith, and it's a piece of rock trapped in another type of rock, which to me was just like, oh my gosh, like the xenolith is telling me, like, it's okay, Rita, like the meta-crisis is terrible, but like you're being held inside of a bigger rock, and like it's okay. And so I just wanted to put this example in here because it is that simple. Like, it is just a choice. It is just a choice to be curious, to like allow for like relational things that happen in your life to have meaning. You can be selfish. You can be like, you know what, I'm gonna make this about me, and I'm gonna look and see what a xenolith is, and I'm gonna see what it says about what I should be doing right now in this time and place. And it's okay, because actually it is about you, but you is just really, really big, like much bigger than your sense of self. And when you tap into that, the meaning just flows in. Okay, so this was the slide that I was working on. This is me thinking about the meta-crisis. I'm not very happy about it. It's intense, right? Like, we're all here, we're pretty comfortable right now, but like, I know you all have things going on that like exhaust you and make you really frustrated and make you kind of scared, right? Okay, but this is me thinking about the meta-crisis when I have artful intelligence in my back pocket, right? So with all of these stories, all of these things, inclusive of Earthling theory, the cosmic microwave background radiation, eating I don't know what that plant is, following the berry, working in the studio, learning about granite, touching the water, having these experiences and holding them in my body help me. And they help me cultivate all of these things: empathy, love, compassion, creativity. The world is teaching that to me when I engage with it. And then I can take these capacities and I can apply them to, maybe I can't fix the entire educational system. Maybe I can't fix government, but I have friends, I have kids, I have students, I have my own physical health, I have spiritual health, I have all these things that interact with me on a daily basis in a very personal way. And if I can fill up with this stuff, I can approach this stuff in a much better way. And I'm here to tell you, my byproduct is the art, right? I can show you what has happened to us in the forest through my art. In this particular case study, I'm kind of his byproduct, and I can tell you that it works. Because when I have this solid, I can get through my day of this looking like that. And if we could all do that, I think the second option of the beautiful future would be possible. All right, take us home.
So thanks, Rita. And so yeah, I hope, as I'm sitting there thinking, okay, I thought about all that stuff I threw out there in the beginning. Is it going to come full circle? Is it going to make sense? And as I'm sitting there listening to Rita, it's making sense to me. I'm seeing all this stuff that we talked about manifesting. And so anyway, I'll just summarize this talk and say that we're in the midst of a multimodal crisis centered on an impoverished conception of our own consciousness, our own identity, our own way of relating to the world. Artificial intelligence and machine learning. The reason I talked about all that stuff was to make the contrast with how deep our intelligence is, because our intelligence is the endowment of our history with the Earth, which is at least, it's life is 3.8 billion years old on this planet, if you pick that as your starting point. AI's got nothing on us. This intelligence is latent in every human being because we all have this ancestry. We just need to activate it. And that's what Rita and I are doing up there at Hubbard Brook. We're activating the intelligence of nature in us, and then she's expressing it creatively through her art. Oika, in other words, nature, presents an alternative narrative of who we are that is continuous, relational, and entangled. This whole thing was all about the continuity of nature with us. It was about our relationship to nature, and being in right relationship cultivates creativity, and about how our minds, the way we think, the way we feel, the way we emote, it's entangled with the world. And we don't have to be the victims of our priors. Anyway, and that rather than the doomsday scenario that AI is presenting us, if we activate this ancient relationship with nature, then the meta-crisis will solve itself for the most part. That's not to say, I'm not a utopianist, I'm just saying that many of the man-made problems and the extraneous suffering that we do will tend to solve itself. So yeah, I guess that's it, and we're just going to stick around for questions, and hopefully we can make it up to you.